Good evening. This is Exploring History Today, part of the Visiting Author Series. My name is Eric Johnson from Historic Heritage Avon Lake, and tonight we have Dave Schwensen,
Thank you.
author of, get your name right, Beatles at Shea Stadium, the story behind their greatest concert, and this is going back to 1965, so welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Eric. It's nice to be here.
I found out last week that I was going to be doing the interview here, so I went upstairs to the library here and got the book and I read it, and I was really, really impressed by it.
Well, I've got to say, I'm impressed that I have an interviewer that actually read the book.
I read the whole book. It brought back so many memories because at this time I was a freshman in high school, and
Everybody's calculating your age right now while you're doing that.
well, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you know, the book is written in first person. You've interviewed 20 people who was involved with the Beatles,
Yes.
who were involved with the concert, with the production of the concert here, and 24 fans. How did you find these people?
I put the word out.
Oh.
That's what's so great about researching and writing books today. We were talking before we went on the air about computers.
Right.
Okay. When we were younger, we never thought we'd have to deal with these things. But when I decided to write this book, I put the word out on the internet. Some Beatle groups, I'd written an earlier Beatles book, The Beatles in Cleveland.
Right.
So I kind of had already a network in place. So I kind of said, all right, who was at this concert? And I chose the ones who really had interesting stories and kind of moved my story along too.
Now, did you actually interview them, or they?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because everything's written in first person, each chapter, and then it goes on one person to the next, and their experience for that, and then at the end, the fans review. So I thought that was very neat.
Yeah. I just let them talk because they all have such wonderful memories of that era.
Right.
You know, Beatlemania, the 60s, they're baby boomers and they were there. And the fun part for me, a lot of them I talked to, it really, like maybe they hadn't been interviewed before. It's like they had all these memories pent up, like I got to tell somebody about this. And so when I talked to them, I just let them go.
Right. Because the nice thing, you go to a concert, you see the performers, and you see the stagehands running around, but you don't see the people behind the stage and the months before. And this book brings all that out. It's amazing what the logistics are going through to organize a concert.
Yeah, that was a wild thing. I mean, that was, I always say this was the birth of stadium rock.
Yep.
This was the first big one. Elvis did some stadium shows, about half a dozen before he went into the Army back in the 50s. But, they were smaller. He did the Cotton Bowl and he had 26,000 people there. That was the largest one. Now the Beatles, about 8 years later, Shea Stadium, 55,600. They had to more than double that and sell it out. And nobody had done anything like this before. There was no sound system. There was no technology, nothing. They were making it up as they went along.
And rock and roll was never called a concert. It was,
Okay.
this is the first time they used concert with a rock group.
Yeah, it was a rock concert, yeah.
Rock concert.
Outdoor stadium show, stadium rock.
Well, it was performing artists or what it was, or something like they called it before?
Oh, I don't know. They called it a show.
A show.
Rock and roll show.
Yeah, it's interesting. But all the stuff you bring out it was amazing. It's organized into basically three areas: the rise of the Beatles during this era, and the planning for the concert,
Yes.
and the logistics behind it. As I said, I mean, it was amazing that they couldn't drive. They came into New York City. They had to go to Manhattan Hotel, and they couldn't drive to the stadium because it was right beside the New York World's Fair. The traffic. So they came in by helicopter. And then once they went on a building and won the World's Fair, they went into an armored truck.
Yeah, Wells Fargo truck.
And no one knew who was inside.
Well, they kind of had the ones who saw the truck move through, they kind of have that idea. I've got some pictures of like the fans and the police kind of keeping people away from that armored truck. But no, they couldn't drive out there. And they said they wanted to. George Harrison did not want. They flew out there in a helicopter.
Right,
He was not a fan of that.
Right.
And he was quoted, it says in the book that next time he's going to drive. But the deal was the police wouldn't let them because can you imagine going on the highway, the New York freeway, getting out to Flushing, Queens, where Shea Stadium was, and it's always a traffic jam. I used to live there, so it's always stopped traffic. Can you imagine all the kids going out to the concert? They turn around, look at the car next to them, and there's the Beatles sitting there.
Plus the World
They're
Fair
not
at the same
going
time.
anywhere.
And then the Stones came by boat.
Yes, the Rolling Stones. By and the guy who brought them there was Alan Klein, who was going to be the future manager of the Beatles later on. So people don't know that Alan Klein
Well, you
was
brought so
backstage.
much stuff out, like two of the future wives of the Beatles were in the audience.
Yes, they were in the audience. All those girls sit there, they think, oh, I want to marry a Beatle. Well, two of them at this show
Two of them did that. That was amazing. This was a very, very nice book.
Well, thank you.
The third part was the concert itself. And of course, they could just lip sync without playing because no one could hear what was going on.
Well,
Instead of
now,
screaming.
I disagree with that.
Well, with the being taped in that.
Well, the people, this is always the fun part of doing these kind of books when I talk to people. And it works out this way. The girls always say, oh, we couldn't hear them. We couldn't hear them. The guys heard them fine. Now, that's because the girls were usually screaming.
Right.
And unless you were a guy sitting next to a girl who was screaming the whole time, then maybe you had a hard time hearing. And the ones in the upper deck said they couldn't hear anything. But the ones I talked to that had decent seats, I saw the Beatles in concert. I heard them fine. They were great. They sounded great. But the girls will say, no, they never heard anything.
But still, after your ears are ringing for hours afterwards.
Well, it's like standing next to a jet plane taking off.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the best way to describe it.
And the third part is a TV special.
Yes, the making of the TV show.
Which, the 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter, they cut and paste, put everything in, and all the outtakes are on the floor. And then they actually don't throw away. It was filmed, so they recycled it because of the silver in there. But now all that stuff is lost, and today's stuff is kept, and it's bloopers and outtakes, and it's big business for that there.
Oh yeah, it's such a shame. It's a real heartbreak for a lot of Beatles fans. And a lot of them didn't realize, I'm not going to say it was just because of my book, but I've done a lot of the Beatle festivals, and I've talked to a lot of Beatle fans, and when they find out what happened to that film, and it wasn't just the concert they filmed. They filmed the Beatles in New York. They landed on a Friday, and they filmed them until they left Tuesday. And all that film is gone. Film,
and you talk about what inside their waiting room and all the people in there, and they filmed all that. So much of that was lost.
Oh yeah, all we have left is was actually in the TV special.
Right.
And,
exactly.
That's the only.
And they cut 3 or 4 songs out of the concert to put in the TV special.
They one of them
modified it.
Yeah, one of them. She's a Woman, very popular Beatles song. It was the second song they performed at the concert. Was not filmed because going back to 1965, this concert was filmed in 35 millimeter. It was filmed like a major motion picture. We're talking about Cleopatra. We're talking about these big pictures they had at those times.
Big cameras.
They had the big cameras, and so the film, you had the big reels of film. They only lasted so long. They had to change it every 10 minutes or whatever they had to do for that film. I don't know, but they were all timed to have the film unloaded and reloaded with fresh film at the same time. And it happened during the second song, right before the second song, She's a Woman.
Okay.
So there's no footage of that. There never was.
Well, we have that stuff. To have the complete concert would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
Are you planning any more follow-ups on the Beatles, or because?
You never know.
Never know.
I don't know. I didn't know I was going to do this one.
Okay.
Like I said, I've written. This is my this 5th or 6th book. This one, but I wrote a book a few years before this called The Beatles in Cleveland, which is about the Cleveland concerts. I'm a native of Cleveland. I grew up in Vermillion.
Right here.
I got a copy back there.
Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit.
There it is. Mom and Dad took me to see the Beatles at Cleveland Stadium, and it's something I'd always talked about from then on. Throughout my whole career, everywhere I've lived, everything I've done, I always mention that. And so I put together that book just pretty much for myself, my own memories, and interviewed some of the famous people from Cleveland in the 60s, Jane Scott, Jerry G., Big Jack Armstrong, some of the names that baby boomers will recognize. But when that book came out, I thought, well, that was just for me. That was great. But I started getting some really good reviews, and I started hearing from people in the Beatles' inner circle and just people who knew them. And a guy who turned out to be a good friend of mine, a very famous photographer in New York, Philip Kamen is his name, bought my book in the Park Avenue bookstore that I used to go to when I lived in Manhattan. So it's funny, I used to go to that store. And he convinced me to start writing the Shea Stadium book. And I just had a blast with that. That was a lot of fun.